"She won't last 2 weeks," someone said, and the laughter rolled across the boot camp yard before the sun had fully cleared the pine trees. Emily Carter heard every word. She always did. The morning air at Fort Redwood carried sound for miles, especially the kind meant to humiliate. Rows of recruits moved across the training field under the watchful eyes of drill instructors. Boots pounded packed dirt. Cadences echoed between concrete barracks. The entire base seemed alive with energy, ambition, and competition. Emily stood near the back of her platoon, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her frame noticeably smaller than most of the recruits around her. A heavy ammunition crate sat at her feet. When the order came to move it to the equipment truck, she bent down, gripped the handles, and lifted. The crate rose only a few inches before slipping from her hands and dropping back into the dirt. A few recruits exchanged smirks. Then came the laughter. Not loud at first, just enough for her to hear. "That's the future warrior?" One recruit muttered. "She looks like she weighs less than the crate." Another shook his head. "No chance she graduates." Emily didn't answer. She simply crouched again, adjusted her grip, and dragged the crate the remaining distance without saying a word. The laughter followed her anyway. By breakfast, half the platoon had heard the story. By lunch, everyone had. The small recruit who couldn't lift the ammo crate. The nickname appeared before the day ended. Featherweight. Nobody knew who started it. Everybody used it. Emily never reacted. She ate quietly in the mess hall. She cleaned her gear without complaint. She completed every assignment exactly as instructed. The more silent she remained, the more the others filled the silence with assumptions. Some believed she was scared. Others thought she lacked confidence. A few wondered if she had been admitted by mistake. Sergeant Ryan Walker watched the situation develop from a distance. 15 years in the Army had taught him how to identify recruits who belonged and recruits who didn't. At least that was what he believed. Every statistic pointed in the same direction. Emily struggled with carrying weight. She rarely spoke. She avoided attention. Nothing about her suggested elite potential. During afternoon drills, the platoon gathered around a rope climbing tower. One by one, recruits attempted the ascent. Some succeeded. Others failed. Emily waited patiently at the end of the line. When her turn came, several recruits exchanged knowing looks. "This should be interesting," someone whispered. Emily approached the rope, wrapped her hands around it, and stared upward. For a brief moment, her expression changed. The uncertainty vanished. The hesitation disappeared. Her eyes became focused, calculating. Then, just as quickly, the look was gone. She began climbing. Not fast, not slow. Steady, controlled, methodical. She reached the top without fanfare, touched the platform, and descended. No celebration, no smile, no glance toward the crowd. Yet Sergeant Walker noticed something unusual. Most recruits climbed with effort. Emily climbed with precision, like someone following measurements only she could see. Later that evening, long after lights out, the barracks fell silent. Recruits collapsed into their bunks, exhausted from the day's punishment. Outside, a cool wind moved through the trees surrounding Fort Redwood. In the darkness, a lone figure sat beneath a dim security light near the equipment shed. Emily opened a worn notebook. Its pages were filled with numbers, angles, weather notes, and carefully handwritten observations. Wind direction, elevation changes, distance estimates. Line after line of calculations covered the pages. She studied them quietly while the rest of the base slept. Then she looked toward the distant training range hidden beyond the hills. A faint smile touched her face for the first time all day. Somewhere in the darkness stood a challenge nobody else knew was coming. And somewhere beyond that challenge waited the one thing Emily Carter had never been afraid of. The next morning arrived with cold fog hanging over Fort Redwood and a steady wind moving across the training grounds. Reveille sounded before sunrise, pulling recruits from their bunks and into another day of drills. Emily Carter was already awake. By the time the first boots hit the barracks floor, she had made her bed, organized her locker, and finished reviewing the notes in her worn notebook. She slid it beneath her mattress before anyone could notice. Outside, the platoon assembled in formation under floodlights that painted long shadows across the pavement. Sergeant Ryan Walker paced slowly in front of the recruits, hands behind his back, eyes scanning every face. "Today is about observation," he announced. "Most recruits think success comes from strength. They are wrong. Success comes from paying attention. Several recruits exchanged confused looks. Ryan rarely started mornings with lectures. Usually he preferred action over words. You miss details, you make mistakes. You make mistakes, you fail. His gaze briefly stopped on Emily before moving on. The morning exercise sent teams across different sections of the base, carrying maps and completing navigation tasks. Most recruits rushed through checkpoints, eager to finish first. Emily moved differently. She studied landmarks. She checked wind direction. She noticed small details others ignored. At one checkpoint, a wooden marker had been moved several feet from its original location. Half the platoon missed it entirely. Emily did not. At another station, recruits were required to estimate distance without equipment. Answers varied wildly. One recruit guessed 300 yards. Another guessed 600. Emily quietly wrote 475 yards on her card. Later, instructors measured the actual distance. 480 yards. A difference of only 5 yards. Nobody paid much attention except Ryan Walker. Standing beside another instructor, he folded his arms. Lucky guess, one of them said. Ryan nodded slowly. Maybe, but he was not entirely convinced. During lunch, the usual conversations filled the mess hall. Recruits compared scores, complained about training, and joked about who might wash out next. Emily sat alone near the corner as always. Jake Miller glanced toward her table and smirked. Featherweight probably spent all morning getting lost. Ethan Brooks laughed. She probably thinks maps are optional. Several recruits joined in. Emily continued eating without reacting. The comments rolled past her like background noise. Yet not everyone was laughing. Across the room, Ryan noticed something unusual. Most recruits who faced constant criticism eventually responded. Some argued. Some complained. Some quit. Emily did none of those things. Her silence felt different. Deliberate. Controlled. As though she had heard worse before arriving at Fort Redwood. That afternoon, the platoon gathered near the long-distance training range. Rows of targets stretched across open terrain toward distant hills. Most recruits assumed another standard marksmanship lesson was coming. Then a large tarp was pulled away near the equipment shed. Several heavy cases sat beneath it. Conversations immediately stopped. Recruits leaned forward with curiosity. Even the instructors seemed more alert than usual. Ryan stepped forward. Starting tomorrow, he announced, you will begin advanced familiarization training. He paused long enough to build anticipation. Some of you will have the opportunity to work with equipment very few soldiers ever touch. Excited whispers spread through the crowd. Emily remained expressionless, but her attention sharpened. Ryan continued. Selection will depend on discipline, performance, and observation skills. Not strength. Not popularity. Several recruits glanced toward Emily and chuckled quietly. They assumed nothing would change. Ryan dismissed the formation, and the platoon headed back toward the barracks. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Emily slowed near the edge of the training grounds. Beyond a chain-link fence, partially hidden beneath protective covers, she noticed the unmistakable silhouette of a rifle resting on a maintenance rack. Most recruits walked past without recognizing it. Emily stopped for only a second. Her eyes locked onto the shape, the heavy barrel, the massive muzzle brake, the long profile she knew better than almost anything in the world. Then she continued walking. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Redwood, a faint smile returned to her face. The following morning, excitement spread through Fort Redwood faster than any rumor since the start of training. Recruits moved through breakfast barely touching their food, all talking about the same thing. Advanced familiarization training. Nobody knew exactly what equipment would be issued, but everyone had theories. Some expected specialized optics. Others predicted long-range rifles reserved for top performers. Jake Miller seemed especially confident. Whatever it is, they are not handing it to Featherweight, he announced loudly as several recruits laughed. Emily sat quietly at the end of the table, finishing her meal without looking up. Across the room, Sergeant Ryan Walker reviewed a clipboard while pretending not to listen. By mid-morning, the platoon assembled at the long-distance range. The fog had lifted, revealing rolling hills stretching far beyond the target lanes. Metal frames stood at various distances across the landscape, some visible with the naked eye, others barely recognizable. The range felt different from every training area they had visited so far. More serious, more demanding, more permanent. Several instructors stood beside heavy equipment cases arranged in a neat line. When Ryan arrived, conversations immediately stopped. He walked slowly in front of the formation before stopping beside the largest case. "Today is not about shooting," he said. "Today is about respect." The recruits exchanged confused looks. Ryan rested a hand on the case. Respect for equipment. Respect for discipline. Respect for patience. He opened the lid. The moment the rifle became visible, silence spread through the entire platoon. Even recruits with little firearms knowledge recognized it immediately. The rifle seemed enormous resting inside the foam-lined case. Thick barrel. Massive receiver. Heavy-duty optics mounted above it. It looked less like a standard rifle and more like a machine built for absolute precision. Several recruits stepped closer for a better look. Jake whistled quietly. "That thing is huge." Ryan nodded. "This platform rewards skill and punishes carelessness. Most people spend years learning to use it properly." Emily remained motionless in formation. Her expression revealed nothing, yet her eyes never left the rifle. One by one, recruits were invited forward to help move equipment to the firing stations. Many struggled with the weight. Some required assistance. Others nearly lost their balance carrying ammunition boxes and support gear. The instructors watched carefully. Every action seemed to be evaluated. Eventually, only one case remained unopened. Ryan glanced down at his clipboard. "Carter." Several heads turned immediately. Jake smirked. Ethan shook his head. "This should be good." Emily stepped forward. Ryan pointed toward the final case. "Take that rifle to lane 7. A few recruits laughed under their breath. The rifle appeared almost absurdly large compared to her smaller frame. Ryan folded his arms and waited. Emily crouched beside the case. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of fumbling or hesitating, she carefully checked the balance point before lifting. The movement looked practiced, natural, efficient. The rifle rose smoothly into her hands. No strain, no adjustment, no awkward repositioning. She carried it across the range with steady steps and placed it exactly where instructed. The laughter disappeared. Ryan noticed it immediately. So did every instructor watching nearby. Emily began organizing the accessories beside the firing position. Bipod, scope covers, data card. Every item moved into place with calm precision. She never rushed. She never looked around for approval. She simply worked. Standing 50 yards away, Ryan narrowed his eyes. Most recruits handled unfamiliar equipment cautiously. Emily handled it like someone greeting an old friend. For the first time since training began, a question entered his mind that he could not easily answer. Who exactly was Emily Carter? The remainder of the day transformed into a lesson few recruits expected. Instead of firing live rounds, the instructors focused entirely on equipment preparation, optics adjustment, environmental calculations, and range discipline. For many recruits, the process felt boring. They had imagined dramatic moments on the firing line. Instead, they spent hours learning measurements, recording weather conditions, and studying procedures. Complaints appeared almost immediately. Jake Miller leaned against the table while adjusting his optic for the third time. "I thought we were here to shoot," he muttered. Ethan Brooks nodded. "This feels like math class." Several recruits laughed. Across the range, Emily Carter sat quietly at lane 7. A laminated data sheet rested beside her. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, elevation. She recorded every number carefully. While others rushed through instructions, she treated each detail as if it mattered. Sergeant Ryan Walker moved between lanes observing the recruits. Everywhere he looked, he saw common mistakes. Incorrect scope settings, poor equipment handling, rushed calculations. Then he reached lane 7. Emily had already completed every required adjustment. Ryan examined her setup. Scope alignment was correct. Bipod position was stable. Data card was organized. Nothing appeared out of place. "Who helped you?" Ryan asked. Emily looked up. "Nobody, Sergeant." Ryan glanced around. "You completed all of this yourself?" "Yes, Sergeant." He studied her face for signs of exaggeration. There were none. "How?" Emily paused briefly. "I followed the instructions." Ryan looked back at the equipment. Something about that answer bothered him. The instructions were not simple. Most recruits struggled through them for hours. Yet Emily spoke as though she had assembled ordinary furniture. Before he could ask another question, another instructor called his name from across the range. Ryan walked away, but the feeling remained. Later that afternoon, recruits were assigned a practical exercise. Without using range markers, they needed to estimate distances to various targets scattered across the hills. Answers were recorded and compared. Most estimates missed by large margins. Some targets appeared closer than they actually were. Others seemed farther away because of terrain and lighting. When Emily turned in her worksheet, the instructor reviewing the answers frowned. Then he checked them again. Finally, he called Ryan over. "Take a look at this." Ryan studied the page. Target 1, difference of 4 yards. Target 2, difference of 3 yards. Target 3, difference of 2 yards. Every estimate fell remarkably close to the actual measurement. "Is this correct?" Ryan asked. The instructor nodded slowly. "Closest set of numbers we have seen all day." Ryan looked across the range. Emily was helping clean equipment while everyone else packed up. She seemed completely unaware of the attention. Or perhaps she simply did not care. As evening approached, the wind began strengthening across the valley. Flags near the firing line snapped sharply in the breeze. Instructors postponed the next exercise until morning because conditions were becoming unpredictable. Most recruits welcomed the delay. Long-range shooting and changing wind conditions intimidated even confident trainees. Yet as the platoon prepared to leave, Ryan noticed Emily standing near the edge of the range. Her eyes followed the movement of the flags. Then she looked toward distant trees swaying along a ridgeline nearly half a mile away. She seemed to be measuring something invisible, calculating something no one else could see. Ryan watched for several seconds before approaching. "What are you looking at, Carter?" Emily turned toward him. "The wind, Sergeant." Ryan glanced at the flags. "Everyone can see the wind." Emily hesitated. "Not the same way, Sergeant." For a moment neither spoke. Then she returned her attention to the hills. Ryan followed her gaze. The trees, the grass, the drifting clouds. Suddenly he realized she was not simply observing conditions. She was reading them. The realization unsettled him more than he expected. Because for the first time since she arrived at Fort Redwood, Emily Carter no longer looked like a recruit struggling to keep up. She looked like someone waiting patiently for everyone else to catch up. The weather shifted overnight. By sunrise, low clouds drifted above the hills surrounding Fort Redwood, and a steady crosswind moved through the valley. Conditions that frustrated most recruits seemed to energize the instructors. This was exactly the type of environment where mistakes became obvious. The platoon assembled at the long-distance range shortly after breakfast. Today would be their first practical optics exercise. No live firing yet. Just target acquisition, adjustment procedures, and environmental calculations under changing conditions. Groans spread through the formation when they heard the plan. Jake Miller shook his head. "Another day of numbers." Ethan Brooks laughed. "I joined the Army, not a weather station." Ryan Walker ignored the complaints. He divided the recruits into pairs and assigned observation stations across the range. Each team received a spotting scope, a notebook, and a list of targets hidden throughout the terrain. Their job seemed simple. Calculate distance. Record environmental effects. Predict adjustments. Yet as the morning progressed, most recruits struggled. Wind patterns changed constantly. Light conditions shifted. Targets blended into the landscape. Frustration grew with every passing hour. Emily Carter worked alone at a station overlooking the western hills. Ryan had assigned her there intentionally. He wanted to see what she would do without assistance. Through the spotting scope, she observed distant markers positioned hundreds of yards apart. Occasionally, she wrote brief notes into her notebook. Then she paused to study the movement of grass across a ridgeline. A few minutes later, she added more numbers. Her process appeared almost effortless. Around noon, Ryan began reviewing prediction sheets from the recruits. The results were inconsistent. Some estimates were acceptable. Most were not. Then he reached Emily's worksheet. His eyes narrowed immediately. Every adjustment calculation closely matched the instructor reference data. Every wind correction fell within a remarkably small margin of error. Ryan checked the page twice, then a third time. Finally, he walked toward lane 7. Emily was organizing equipment when he arrived. "Carter." "Yes, Sergeant." He held up the worksheet. "Where did you learn this?" Emily glanced at the paper. "Learn what, Sergeant?" "These calculations." "Practice, Sergeant." Ryan waited for additional explanation. None came. "Practice where?" Emily looked toward the distant hills. "Different places." The answer felt incomplete. yet somehow honest. Ryan studied her for several seconds before turning away. Something about the conversation bothered him. Not because she seemed deceptive. Quite the opposite. She answered with the calm certainty of someone who had no reason to impress anyone. Later that afternoon, the recruits gathered around a classroom tent for a weather briefing. An instructor explained how wind conditions changed at different distances. Most recruits listened with varying levels of attention. Emily listened carefully. Then she noticed something unusual. The example chart being displayed contained a minor error. It was small enough that almost nobody would notice. Almost nobody except someone who spent years studying similar data. She raised her hand. The room grew quiet. It was the first time many recruits had ever seen her volunteer to speak. "Yes, Carter?" the instructor asked. Emily pointed toward the chart. "I think the correction factor for the second example should be slightly different, sir." Several recruits exchanged amused looks. Jake quietly laughed. Correcting an instructor seemed like a terrible idea. The instructor examined the chart. Then he frowned. A moment later, he checked his notes. The room became silent. "She is right." Every head turned toward Emily. The instructor adjusted the number and continued the lesson. Jake's smile disappeared. Ethan stared at Emily with confusion. Ryan watched from the back of the tent. More pieces were beginning to fit together. The distance estimates. The equipment handling. The wind calculations. The confidence. Yet one question remained unanswered. How had a recruit who struggled to lift an ammunition crate arrived with skills that seemed years beyond everyone else around her? That evening, after training ended, Ryan remained at the range reviewing paperwork. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, a gust of wind blew a loose page across the gravel. He caught it before it escaped. It was not military paperwork. It was a sheet torn from a notebook. Handwritten calculations covered the page. Advanced calculations. Detailed observations. Notes extending back years. At the bottom of the page was a name written in faded ink. Ryan stared at it for several seconds. Then he read it again. Colonel Nathan Carter. The name was familiar. Very familiar. And suddenly, for the first time, Ryan realized this story might be much bigger than a quiet recruit named Emily Carter. Ryan Walker sat alone inside the range operations office long after the rest of Fort Redwood had settled into silence. The page he had found rested on the desk in front of him beneath a small lamp. Outside, darkness covered the training grounds. Inside, one name continued pulling his attention back again and again. Colonel Nathan Carter. Ryan leaned back in his chair and stared at the faded handwriting. 20 years in military service had exposed him to countless names, countless records, countless stories. Very few remained memorable. Nathan Carter was one of them. He remembered hearing instructors discuss him years earlier. Not because of rank. Not because of publicity. Quite the opposite. Nathan Carter rarely appeared in headlines. Yet among long-range marksmanship instructors, his reputation bordered on legendary. His calculations had been studied in advanced training programs. His field notes had circulated through professional circles for years. Ryan remembered one instructor describing him with a simple phrase. He never guessed. He calculated. The memory returned with surprising clarity. Ryan looked down at the page again. Wind formulas. Observation notes. Environmental corrections. The style felt familiar. Too familiar. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Training resumed before sunrise. Ryan watched Emily Carter more closely than ever. Not because he wanted to expose her. Because he wanted answers. During physical drills, she remained exactly the same as before. Quiet. Disciplined. Uninterested in attention. She still struggled with some strength-based exercises. She still finished near the middle of the group in endurance events. Nothing about her performance screamed prodigy. Yet every time training shifted toward observation, calculations, or precision, the pattern repeated itself. She moved differently, thought differently, saw things others missed. By lunchtime, Ryan had made a decision. He found Emily organizing equipment behind the maintenance shed. "Walk with me, Carter." "Yes, Sergeant." They crossed the training grounds without speaking. Eventually, they reached a small observation platform overlooking the western range. The valley stretched for miles beneath a bright blue sky. Ryan stopped near the railing. "You know who Nathan Carter was?" Emily remained silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." Ryan studied her expression. No surprise. No nervousness. "How?" Emily looked toward the hills. "He was my father." The answer landed with unexpected weight. Ryan had suspected it. Hearing it confirmed changed everything. Why did you never mention that? Emily shrugged slightly. Nobody asked, Sergeant. Ryan almost laughed. It was the most honest answer he had heard in years. Your notebook, he said. Those notes came from him. Emily nodded. Some of them. Ryan waited. Some. The older pages are his. The newer ones are mine. For several seconds, neither spoke. Wind moved across the valley below them. Ryan found himself looking at her differently now. Not because of her father. Because of what she had done with that knowledge. Nobody could inherit discipline. Nobody could inherit patience. Those had to be earned. Did he train you? Ryan finally asked. Emily's eyes remained fixed on the distant ridgeline. Since I was 8 years old. Ryan absorbed the answer quietly. Suddenly dozens of small mysteries made sense. The calculations. The observations. The confidence around advanced equipment. Years of preparation had been hidden behind a recruit uniform and a quiet personality. Yet one detail still bothered him. If you know all this, Ryan said, why come here? Emily smiled faintly. Because knowing something and earning something are different. Ryan found himself unexpectedly impressed. Most recruits arrived hoping to prove themselves to others. Emily seemed interested only in proving something to herself. Later that afternoon, a notice spread across the base. An advanced long-range evaluation would take place in 2 days. Participation would be limited. The challenge involved the most distant target course available at Fort Redwood. A course so difficult that very few recruits attempted it. Excitement immediately swept through the platoon. Jake Miller bragged that he would dominate the event. Ethan Brooks claimed he was already preparing. Most recruits spent the evening talking about possibilities. Emily said nothing. But when the announcement reached her, she quietly folded the paper and placed it inside her notebook. Because unlike everyone else at Fort Redwood, she understood exactly how difficult the challenge would be. And somewhere deep inside, she had been waiting for it all along. The morning of the evaluation arrived with unusual energy across Fort Redwood. Recruits who normally dragged themselves to formation appeared fully awake before sunrise. Conversations filled the barracks, the mess hall, and every pathway leading toward the long-range facility. Everyone knew this event was different. The advanced course was rarely open to recruits. The target sat farther than any standard qualification distance used on the base. More importantly, the challenge carried a reputation. For years, experienced shooters had attempted to achieve a perfect score there. Very few succeeded. As the platoon assembled near the range, instructors moved with a level of seriousness that immediately captured attention. Additional observation equipment had been set up. Senior personnel arrived from neighboring training units. Even officers who rarely visited the range appeared interested in watching. Jake Miller smiled confidently while adjusting his gear. This is finally my kind of competition, he said. Ethan Brooks nodded. Somebody is going to make a name for themselves today. Neither of them looked toward Emily Carter. In their minds, the outcome had already been decided. Ryan Walker stood near the briefing table reviewing participant assignments. He noticed Emily standing quietly near the back of the formation. No nervous movements. No unnecessary conversation. Just calm focus. The same calm he had seen every time precision mattered. Once everyone gathered, the lead instructor stepped forward. Listen carefully, he announced. The target course you are attempting today is the longest available training challenge at Fort Redwood. Conditions will not be adjusted. Wind will remain a factor. Environmental corrections are your responsibility. The recruits listened intently. This is not a strength competition. This is a thinking competition. Ryan noticed Emily's expression remain unchanged. The instructor continued. The target sits beyond the distance most recruits ever attempt during basic training. Many experienced personnel have failed here. That is normal. Quiet murmurs spread through the crowd. The difficulty of the challenge suddenly felt very real. Participants were assigned positions. One by one, they prepared their equipment and recorded environmental data. Wind speeds fluctuated throughout the valley. Clouds moved across the sun, creating changing light conditions. Every variable seemed determined to complicate the exercise. Jake completed his calculations first. He appeared eager to prove himself. Ethan followed shortly after. Several others prepared with varying levels of confidence. Emily remained seated beside her equipment, writing notes into her notebook. Not rushing, not hesitating, simply observing. Ryan watched from a distance. Occasionally, she would look toward the hills, then back at her notes, then toward the clouds, then toward the flag's position downrange. Her process looked less like preparation and more like a conversation with the environment itself. A few recruits noticed and laughed quietly. "She is overthinking it," Jake said. "You either take the shot or you do not." Ryan heard the comment, but said nothing. Experience had taught him that the loudest confidence was rarely the most reliable. As final preparations continued, a maintenance vehicle arrived carrying additional equipment. Several instructors gathered around one particular item covered beneath a protective tarp. Curious conversations immediately began. The tarp was removed moments later, revealing a freshly calibrated target assembly. A senior range officer stepped forward. "There has been a change." Every head turned toward him. "The command staff has approved use of the historical challenge target." Silence followed. Even some instructors looked surprised. Ryan felt his eyebrows rise. He knew exactly what that meant. The historical challenge target had not been used in years. It represented the most demanding precision test ever established at Fort Redwood. The record attached to it still stood untouched. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Excitement transformed into uncertainty. The challenge had suddenly become far more difficult than anyone expected. Emily looked toward the distant target area. For the first time all morning, her eyes narrowed slightly. Not from fear, recognition, as if she understood something the others did not. Then she opened her notebook one final time and quietly turned to a page that had not been touched since arriving at Fort Redwood. The historical challenge began shortly after noon. One by one, recruits stepped onto the firing line and attempted the course that had earned almost mythical status throughout Fort Redwood. The atmosphere felt different now. The casual confidence that had filled the range earlier had disappeared. Reality had taken its place. The first recruit missed key scoring zones because of shifting wind conditions. The second performed slightly better but still fell short of expectations. Others followed with similar results. Some blamed the weather. Others blamed nerves. None came close to the standing benchmark attached to the historical target. Jake Miller stepped forward, determined to prove himself. Throughout training, he had spoken with confidence. Now dozens of eyes watched as he prepared. He completed his calculations quickly and settled behind the rifle. His performance was respectable, better than many recruits. Yet when the final numbers appeared, disappointment crossed his face. Respectable was not enough. Ethan Brooks followed with similar results. By late afternoon, the challenge had humbled nearly everyone who attempted it. Conversations became quieter. Smiles became rarer. Even experienced instructors seemed unsurprised. The target had a reputation for a reason. Ryan Walker stood near the observation station reviewing score sheets. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Requesting permission to participate, Sergeant." Ryan looked up. Emily Carter stood beside Lane 7 holding her notebook. Around them, several recruits exchanged amused glances. Jake could not hide a small laugh. "Of course," he muttered. "Why not?" Ryan studied Emily for a moment. "Permission granted." Emily nodded once and moved toward the firing position. The range gradually fell silent. Nobody expected much. After all, this was still the same recruit they had mocked since the first week of training. The same recruit they called Featherweight. Yet Ryan noticed something different. The moment Emily reached the firing line, every trace of uncertainty vanished. Her movements became precise, deliberate, familiar. She adjusted her equipment without hesitation, checked environmental data, verified conditions, then opened her notebook to the page she had reviewed earlier. Several instructors exchanged curious looks. Ryan found himself watching more closely than anyone else. Emily studied the valley stretching beyond the target area. Wind crossed from left to right before shifting along a distant ridgeline. Sunlight reflected differently across patches of dry grass. Most people would have seen scenery. Emily seemed to see information. Minutes passed. Nobody rushed her. Finally, she closed the notebook and placed it beside her equipment. The range officer confirmed conditions. Observers prepared their scopes. Data systems activated. Every measurement would be recorded. Every result verified. Emily settled into position and looked through the optic. The world around her appeared to disappear. The whispers stopped. The laughter stopped. Even the wind seemed quieter. Ryan noticed something he would remember for years. Emily did not look excited. She did not look nervous. She looked completely at home, as though every early morning, every notebook entry, Every lesson from her father had quietly led to this exact moment. Then she made her final adjustment. The range officer glanced toward the observation station. Seconds later, a distant confirmation tone sounded through the monitoring system. One instructor immediately looked up. Another checked his display. A third leaned closer to verify the reading. Confusion spread across their faces. Nobody spoke. Ryan stepped toward the monitors. Numbers appeared on the screen, then updated, then locked into place. For several long seconds, the entire range remained silent. Because everyone watching understood the same thing at exactly the same moment. Something extraordinary had just happened. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The monitors continued displaying the same numbers as if daring someone to challenge them. One instructor checked the system again. Another verified the environmental data. A third reviewed the target readings from the beginning. The result remained unchanged. The historical challenge record that had stood for years at Fort Redwood had just been surpassed. A low murmur spread through the range. Then even that disappeared. Ryan Walker stared at the screen before turning toward Emily Carter. She was already organizing her equipment. No celebration. No triumphant smile. No attempt to draw attention to herself. The contrast made the moment feel even larger. Around the firing line, recruits struggled to process what they had witnessed. Jake Miller looked from the monitor to Emily and back again. Ethan Brooks seemed equally stunned. For weeks they had laughed at her. For weeks they had reduced her entire identity to her size. Now none of them knew what to say. The senior range officer stepped forward and addressed the observation team. Confirm the data. Minutes passed as every measurement was reviewed. Finally, the officer nodded. Confirmed. The word echoed across the range like a final verdict. Emily Carter officially held the highest score ever recorded on the historical challenge course. Ryan felt an unexpected sense of pride. Not because of the record itself. Because he remembered the recruit who had arrived weeks earlier carrying a nickname created by people who never bothered to know her. He remembered the laughter, the assumptions, the certainty that she did not belong. Now those same people stood in complete silence. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ryan approached Emily near lane 7. She had finished securing her equipment and was preparing to leave. Carter. Yes, Sergeant. Ryan glanced toward the distant hills. Who taught you? Emily followed his gaze. For a moment she said nothing. Then a small smile appeared. My father started it. Ryan nodded. He had expected that answer. Emily continued. The Army finished it. Ryan stood quietly for several seconds. There was nothing left to add. The statement explained everything. Discipline, patience, humility, skill. None of it appeared overnight. It had been built over years, one lesson at a time. Nearby, Jake slowly approached. The confidence that normally filled his voice was gone. Carter, he said awkwardly. Emily looked at him. Yeah. Jake hesitated before speaking. I was wrong about you. Emily studied him for a second. Then she nodded once. Okay. No anger. No revenge. No lecture. Just a simple acknowledgement. Somehow that made the lesson even stronger. As the sun began setting over Fort Redwood, recruits walked back toward the barracks beneath a sky painted orange and gold. Conversations sounded different now. The laughter had disappeared. The whispers had disappeared. In their place was something far more valuable. Respect. Not because Emily demanded it. Not because of her family name. Not because of a single performance. Respect had arrived because truth eventually revealed itself. People had judged her by what they could see. Her record was built on what they never bothered to see. And as Fort Redwood settled into evening, one lesson remained clear to everyone who had witnessed that day. Talent may attract attention. Achievement may earn recognition. But true respect is earned quietly, long before anyone is watching.